Hi everyone, I am here to give you an overview of next month's Great Artist Lesson, where we will be continuing our Famous Artist series for our first and second graders. And next month they're going to be learning about Claude Monet. I'm going to give you a little overview of the lesson itself and talk a little bit about the project. So let's start at the beginning. As we do with every famous artist, we have to start at the beginning and talk about how they got to be the great artists that they are. For Claude Monet, he was born in France and he lived in a coastal town. And funny enough, he had a very humble beginning where he was a caricaturist. Yes, much like those people that you see at Knott's Berry Farm, those people one day may grow up to be a famous artist one day, because that is exactly how Claude Monet got his start. When he was 20 years old, he went to art school, and he and his fellow artists went to this art school in Paris, and they would sit in a cafe and they would talk about theories of art and how they were going to rebel against current art strict standards that they had. And this is where Claude Monet developed his theories, his own personal theories about art. Now, in fact, in this cafe, they say that this particular cafe that these artists met at was the birthplace of Impressionism, and that Claude Monet was the father of Impressionism. Now, of course, the kids are going to look at you going, what the heck is Impressionism? So on a slide, we put up a little definition that kind of explains what Impressionism is, and some of the characteristics: short brush strokes, patches of bright color, and the pursuit of light. And this is a very big concept for Impressionism. Excuse me. A very big concept for Impressionists. So we give them a little definition, and then we talk a little bit how Impressionism got its name. So these artists got together, and because they weren't taken seriously and they were rebelling against the current art standards, they decided to have their own art show. And one of the pieces that was displayed was Claude Monet's Impression Sunrise. Now, a critic looked at this thing and said, ugh, and used impression as an insult in his critique. And it stuck. The Impressionists wore it like a badge of honor. And they became the Impressionists, and they did impressionistic art. And the thing, when you look at this particular piece, and it's on the slide, and you can have a little brief discussion about it, is that the thing about Impressionism, there's no harsh lines, there's no harsh drawings. When you look at this painting, although you don't see any harsh drawings and harsh lines, you know exactly what it is. It is an impression of something, and without having to have all these harsh lines and realism, you know exactly what it is. So it's kind of fun for them that kind of gives them a visual to kind of go with the definition of Impressionism. And then we get into the technique of Impressionists. And like I said, the first and foremost thing about Impressionism is all about the pursuit of light. And an Impressionist believed that you needed to paint what you saw. And how that relates to light is you're painting light, how the light bounces off of something, how the light creates a shape. And Claude Monet had different series of like buildings and trees, and one of his famous series was a haystack series. And up on the slide we have 4 of the pictures of this haystack series, because what Claude Monet did is he painted these haystacks at different times of the day and in different seasons to show how light plays a very big part in the way things that are colored. So that there's a little bit about the technique. And as we go further into the technique with them, the other thing about Impressionism isn't just about light, it's about how the colors are laid together. So what I mean by that is light isn't shown in a picture by just using white paint or yellow paint. In fact, light can be shown by placing colors directly next to each other. A Impressionist does not mix colors. It's not muddled, because that's what it does. If you mix colors, it muddles the colors. They believe that you should put paint right next to each other, big globs and daubs of paint, daubs and dots of paint. And one of the fun slides that we have is we put a very magnified close-up vision of one of the printed artworks that we have hanging up in the room. and we ask them, which artwork is this? And sometimes they get it wrong and sometimes they get it right, but it's really fun for them to see, like, oh my gosh, when you step up really close to an impressionistic art piece, it's really cool to see how all the paint is layered on top of each other. And it's not until you pull yourself all the way back that you understand what the impressionist or the impression of the artwork is. Once we've talked a little bit about the technique and what Impressionism is, we get a little bit more into his personal life. And we talk about the fact that he was married and he had 2 children. And he was poor, but he had a very rich friend. And his friend and his wife, they were very close with each other. And sadly, one day, his wife, Claude Monet's wife, died, and he had 2 children with her, and his very rich friends, they had 4 children. They all moved in together because, we'll take care of you. Well, the reality is that his rich friend lost all of his money, probably from buying all of Claude Monet's paintings. But he lost all of his money, and then sadly, his rich friend died. But not to worry, Claude Monet married his wife, and she helped raise all 6 of the children. And throughout the rest of their life, they stayed married. They did not have a lot of money, and they lived in a beautiful pink house in Giverny, I think that's how you say it, Giverny, France. And because they didn't have a lot of money, Claude Monet decided that he was going to make the most beautiful, and what he said himself was his greatest masterpiece, was his garden. He planted vegetables for them to eat, and he planted flowers for him to paint. And like I said, it was his most prized possession, his most prized masterpiece. So we talk a little bit about that personal life, and then one of the things that we show is, and I think this is a really cool slide, where we show Claude Monet standing next to his water lily paintings, because the kids are going to do these water lily paintings. But personally, for me, I never realized how enormous these water lily paintings are. So you get to see the actual artist standing next to these like 8-foot water lily paintings. So once we've talked a little bit about his life and talked about the end of his life and the fact that he lived to be, I think he was 82, 86, don't quote me, the math's in there someplace, it's 86 I believe, then we get into the project itself. And in this particular project, we are going to have watercolor paper, and one thing to note about watercolor paper is that there are 2 sides to watercolor paper. There is the rough side and there's the smooth side. The smooth side is where they would write their name. The rough side is where the watercolor paint will go. So before you get there into their classroom, you're going to want to make sure you fill up all the water cups so that they have to, clean out their brushes. But this art project will use watercolors, only 2 colors, and the paint tray is going to be loaded with only 2 colors, a green and a blue paint tray. And we may have to have kids share paint trays because I have paint trays going out to all grades this month. So either way, it'll be enough for them, don't worry. And then there will be also some pastels. And they'll get little Ziploc bags, and there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors of pastels. First and foremost, they will take these pastels and they will color and draw little yellow water lilies, big and small, all over the place, about 4 or 5 of them. And then they're going to take a pink pastel and a peach pastel and a green pastel and kind of add accents to these water lilies. Once they've done that, they take a blue pastel and a white pastel and draw swirls as if water had movement. Then they just take, after they've spent some time doing their drawing, their impression of a water lily. Again, no hard lines, no need for a pencil. It's all done just with the pastels to give that impression of a water lily. They then take the watercolor or the watercolor paint. Now here's the key. They need to take their watercolor, load it up with a lot of water, take some paint out of the paint cake itself, and then on the lid, kind of swirl it around on the lid to kind of dilute those colors a little bit. And then they just kind of brush that paint, that watercolor paint, across the paper itself. And that's really all there is to the art lesson, or to the art project itself. It's just drawing these beautiful, colorful water lilies and then just adding the movement of water with some watercolors. And it's a pretty fun one. They really do seem to enjoy it. And that is an overview of next month's Great Artist Lesson. If you have any questions or you need any help, by all means, hit me up, let me know, give me a call. I am here for you, and I will see you in the hallways. Happy creating!